ready to start with the first session. I invite the panelists, Dr. Hassan Bella and Hamada Hamid, to come up to the front, please. In addition, there is a handout for Dr. Bella's presentation. If you've not received that, there are a few extra copies. Actually, Nancy, I'm going to
Is there a camera?
I'm sorry?
Is there a camera?
There's a camera.
There's the camera. Okay, very
Hello. Wave to everybody out in the virtual world. Yeah, sorry. It's my privilege to introduce the panelists for this first session. Dr. Hamada Hamid is currently a clinical fellow at New York University's Center for Global Health and a resident in the Combined Neurology and Psychiatry program at NYU. His current research interests include the role of culture in the presentation and management of neuropsychiatric illnesses. New York University's Center for Global Health and a resident in the Combined Neurology, I just said that, sorry. Our next presenter, Dr. Hassan Bella, is Professor of Family and Community Medicine in the College of Medicine, King Faisal University in Dammam, at the Department of Family and Community Medicine, where he teaches and coordinates many graduate and undergraduate courses. He is the editor of the Journal of Family and Community Medicine, the only journal of its kind in the Middle East, and he has published hundreds of scientific papers and articles in Refereed and other periodicals and journals, including Lancet, the American Journal of Tropical Medicine, and the Annals of Saudi Medicine. Our third presenter, who is joining us virtually but could not be here in person, is Sherine Hamdy, doctoral candidate in anthropology at New York University. Trained in cultural and medical anthropology, she's just finished her dissertation entitled Our Bodies Belong to God, Islam, Medical Science, and Ethical Reasoning in Egyptian Life. I also understand that she has just accepted a position at Brown University beginning next year. Sherine has been a key member of our steering committee for this conference and regrets that she can't be here personally. However, she's following the proceedings from Chicago and should be able to interact with us. I'll be reading her paper then. The format of this session is as follows. I will ask each of our presenters, beginning with Hamada Hamid and then Hassan Bella, and finally I'll read Sherine Hamdy's paper. Each presenter to keep themselves to 15 minutes. If there is additional time, we'll have a chance for short, direct question and answers within those 15 minutes. Otherwise, we'll delay all question and discussion until the second half of the session, when I'll open it to the floor for any questions that you have. So, without further ado, Hamad Hamid.
Thank you. So 7 years ago, Jonathan Brockup was involved in another panel at the American Academy of Religion, and for which many publications came out of, several of which have deeply influenced how I look at Islam and bioethics. One of those papers was written by Daniel Brown, who asserted that Islamic ethics is dominated by theological voluntarism, meaning Allah or God defines what good and evil is. And to access moral truths, you can only access it through script and sacred text. This scripturalism limits the role of human reasoning and stifled, according to him, the development of principle-based reasoning in Islamic ethical inquiry. This assertion by Daniel Brown led me to reflect on the nature of clinical ethics and clinical decision-making. To what degree do broad ethical principles and deductive reasoning inform clinical decisions at the bedside? Furthermore, how are ethical principles or positions negotiated with patients? And specifically, how is the Islamic tradition negotiated with Muslim patients. This paper specifically focuses on Muslim patients and Muslim doctors and the realities of the clinical encounter. The first reality is that even among observant Muslim physicians and Muslim patients, the role of Islam often does not enter the doctor-patient conversation. I argue and illustrate through the case of Mona and Dr. Khan that the secular nature of the clinical encounter paradoxically prevents Dr. Khan from exploring religious issues because of the fear of Mona's autonomy will be compromised. Mona was a 33-year-old Moroccan woman who was 13 weeks pregnant and visited Dr. Khan for a routine well pregnant woman visit. Routine ultrasound revealed that the fetus had really lacked amniotic fluid, and therefore it was likely that the fetus would not develop a proper respiratory system. And in fact, there was concern that the fetus would not survive once delivered. While Dr. Khan, to herself, who, that by the way, is an observant Muslim, to herself wondered what was the most ethically appropriate thing to do from an Islamic position, she never broached the issue to her patient. Instead, she presented the options that any other OB/GYN physician would present. One would be abortion, two would be premature delivery, and three would be intensive monitoring. The nature of Dr. Khan and Mona's relationship was transformed during the course of Mona's pregnancy when they accidentally bumped into each other at the local mosque in New York City. They exchanged pleasantries, and from then on, Mona began to invoke the Islamic tradition in the clinical encounter. She began to talk about her dependence on God, known as tawakkul, and how she really was confident that the baby will come out healthy. She also revealed to Dr. Khan how she really mistrusted the other physicians and felt a connection to Dr. Khan. In the end, unfortunately, Mona's condition decompensated, and Dr. Khan had to convince Mona to get an emergency C-section. Perhaps if Dr. Khan had asked in a non-judgmental way, does religion or spirituality play a role in your medical treatment, they would have been able to discuss more openly Mona's concerns and treatment options earlier on in the course of her pregnancy. There are many cases in which patients across religions do not adhere to treatment recommendations because of their religious beliefs. May be reluctant to share their concerns with their physicians because of the presumed secular nature of the clinical encounter. Conversely, when religious issues are raised by the patient, physicians may attempt to undermine the patient's religious values in order to coerce the patient to comply to treatment recommendations. Abdullah was a 27-year-old Arabic-speaking only homeless gentleman who had little resources, and soon after he immigrated from Egypt, developed a psychotic episode. He became suicidal and was found walking on the Brooklyn Bridge, pondering suicide. He was brought into a public hospital in New York City for suicide ideation and dangerousness to himself. After an involuntary admission to the psychiatric ward and treatment, it was clear that Abdullah had schizophrenia. Unfortunately, Abdullah lacked resources. He didn't have a home. He didn't have family, and he had a history of non-compliance to medication. And the concern was that he was at high risk of committing suicide once released. The treatment team determined that Abdullah was better off being deported to Egypt. And this was against Abdullah's will. Abdullah stayed in the hospital for 2 months, arguing against being deported. It was taken to court, and the court maintained his involuntary status. One of the treatment team members of the treatment team, a Muslim physician, recruited Abdullah's former roommates to convince Abdullah, invoking Islam and tawakkul, dependence on God, to comply to treatment and to return to Egypt. Abdullah eventually succumbed and was deported, escorted to JFK Airport, and deported to Egypt. The use of religion to coerce patients into complying to treatment is not a technique unique to Islam or Muslim patients. I cited literature showing how religious and non-religious physicians often challenge their patients' quote-unquote inappropriate religious reasoning. Sherine in her paper articulately demonstrated how patients draw from Islam to make clinical decisions. In her example, even though Imam Sha'rawi provided a fatwa permitting organ transplantation, many patients felt it was unethical because their bodies belong to God. In addition to the economic, political corruption, mistrust of health institutions, there are several factors that influence the risk-benefit analysis of their clinical and ethical decisions. Many Muslim physicians who are eager to treat patients who require organ transplant and that may improve the clinical outcome may also draw from Islam or Islamic reasoning to challenge the patient's religious understanding. My question to the audience and my colleagues is, when is it appropriate for Muslim health professionals, whether physicians, chaplains, or imams, to challenge a patient's religious reasoning on a clinical position? So as we formulate possible Islamic positions on artificial nutrition, IVF, or the use of stem cells in treatment, our patients may have very different positions based on their understanding of Islamic tradition. This is also relevant to the development of curricula. How are we going to teach our medical students and trainees about Islamic ethics? Is it to challenge their own reasoning, or is it to give them other options to understanding their illness and their ethical decisions? In the two cases, I demonstrate that 1, the secular nature of the doctor-patient relationships espoused by many Western bioethicists may paradoxically restrict and constrain patient autonomy, since their cultural, spiritual, and religious needs are often not addressed. 2, conversely, physicians in the guise of cultural competency may use religious values to coerce the patient to comply to the doctor's preferred treatment. And 3, as we develop positional statements, recommendations, and curricula to develop cultural competent approaches to the Muslim patient and Islamic bioethical courses, physicians should be careful not to present themselves as Islamic authorities that will further challenge the patient's wishes. This is especially important among Muslim physicians and Muslim patients, because in addition to the former's power advantage as clinicians, making claim to religious authority may further restrict a patient's treatment options. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have time for a few brief direct questions to Arnie. Yes, please. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to use the microphone because we're broadcasting here.
Now I feel like I'm on Oprah. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask you if you would explain your choices when you decided to call the patients by their first name only and the doctors by their title and their last name, given that the frame for this included the word autonomy.
That's interesting. Actually, originally when I wrote this, the paper, I actually used the doctor's first name and said Dr. Sophia, and I actually switched it up. It's a topic that comes up quite a bit in the clinical setting, and as a psychiatrist, it also brings up a lot of conversation. It is a difficult question to answer because I don't think there's one solution. I think it's a question that has to be asked to the patient whether they feel more comfortable, how they feel more comfortable being addressed. Do they feel more comfortable being addressed by their first name or by their last name? I used it just to illustrate, just bring a human face to the vignettes. But I can appreciate the sensitivities to using the first name and the last name.
Thanks again, Dr. Hamid, for your presentation. Two questions I have. Sometimes in the clinical encounter, we want to approach it with a best interest standard. The patient asks us, what you would do if you were in my position, or what do you think is best for us? And we have to consider what the patient's background is. So can we approach the clinical encounter with a holistic approach? You're arguing that physicians perhaps who are Muslim at times co-opt religion to restrict autonomy, or on the other hand, sometimes don't present religion, presenting all the treatment options. So how do you become with a holistic approach, presenting the options if the patient desires them in the Islamic perspective? And the second correlate to that is, at times the Islamic or Muslim physician, for example, in Dr. Vardi's work, she said that they're chosen not only because they're Muslim, but because patients expect them to have some sort of understanding of the Islamic principles in their treatment options.
I think that's an important question, and something that we really need to kind of come together across disciplines, including physicians, anthropologists, public health experts, what have you, to come up with the most appropriate approach. What I would suggest, or what I try to suggest in my talk, is depending on the comfort level of the physician and their comfort level with the Islamic tradition, perhaps the best way to approach it is to present them with the different Islamic positions. So let's say, for instance, with Mona's case and abortion. This one was a little bit tricky because, and actually I discussed this very issue with the physician, Dr. Khan, was the name I used to cover. The patient was pregnant, and all these considerations were taken after the 120 days. So it becomes much more tricky, and she was actually asking what was my opinion for the Islamic ethical position, for which I really didn't have a good answer for. If it was before 120 days, then you can say, well, this is so-and-so's opinion, this is so-and-so's opinion, and present the different options to the patient. I'm not suggesting that the Islamic tradition should not be used in the clinical encounter, but I think we're a long ways from figuring out how it's going to be used, how can it be introduced into the clinical encounter.
Thanks very much. We'll have a chance for more questions then afterwards. Next, turn to Dr. Hassan Bella's paper, Islamic Medical Ethics, What and How to Teach. Do you have the presentation?
Yes, please. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. I would like for all of us here to recognize the vision, the courage, and the commitment of the conference organizers for staging this unique gathering to discuss a most important subject, Islam and bioethics. I would like to ask you please to join me in showing them our appreciation. I come from Sudan and I work in Saudi Arabia. My presentation starts now, if you are counting the... And thank you for making us sit, because in the sitting position, you are more likely not to be panicking and to be more relaxed. At least your lower half is static, and so we are more relaxed. Thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.
Now, how I'm going to control this?
Press this button in the back.
Press from the back. Thank you. Teaching of ethics in the Muslim culture is as old as the faith of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad says, I have been sent by God so that I may perfect good manners and ethical conduct. Islamic law, which is called Sharia, unlike secular law, is based on a complete system of morality. Actually, morality and ethics are absolute and divine in Islam. And therefore, the knowledge of sources of morality is essential for Muslim physicians in order to deal with their daily practice problems. However, Sharia or Islamic law has left room for human rational judgment when dealing with ethical dilemmas and gray areas. Indeed, Beauchamp's 4 principles of medical ethics are encapsulated in one verse of the Quran. Sorry, how do we go back? Behold, Allah enjoins justice, beneficence, and doing good towards one's fellow men, and He forbids sins, misdemeanor, and maleficence. The principal goal of teaching Islamic medical ethics is much more than just providing quality care to patients. The first elaborate textbook ever written in medical ethics is the one written by Ali Ishaq Rahawi, and although he was of Jewish origin, he wrote his book along the Islamic principles of medical ethics. And this, of course, reflects how in those days people of different faith managed to live in harmony with each other. Razi's, whom you know, the famous Muslim physician, was said to have joined or wanted to become a doctor because he disrespected, or he had disrespect for what he called unethical physicians of his time. Another Muslim scholar, physician, Ibn Qutbi, criticized some of his contemporary ignorant doctors who are not, according to him, are not committed to ethics. Now, in many Muslim world schools of medicine, medical ethics are not emphasized enough. In some colleges, actually, they are not even taught. And in others, they are taught only didactically, and sometimes what is told is not relevant. This study was triggered by the fact that there is no consensus on how and on what and how to teach Islamic medical ethics. I believe that this is the same case in Western countries or in Western ethics, where the question or the methods, debates are still going on how and what to teach in medical ethics. It's also triggered by the fact that there is very meager research on Islamic medical ethics, and therefore there is need for specialized and qualitative research. This research is expected to fill an important gap in at least the Islamic literature on medical ethics. Now, the objective of this, it was trying to reach a minimum consensus on what and how, actually who, when, and where to teach Islamic medical ethics, but I will restrict myself to what and how in my presentation. For this study also, I used a modified Delphi method, which is a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods. The Delphi method is a controlled debate based on the assumption that a composite opinion is better than any single expert opinion. Experts in the fields are identified and invited to participate. In this study, they were university teachers, religious scholars, authors of papers, research, and books on Islamic medical ethics. I designed a questionnaire which I used with what they call a Likert scale. This is a bipolar type of psychometric scale which measures either positive or negative responses to a statement. It contained open-ended and closed questions, mainly on medical ethics. I summarized, during this process, summarized the results and sent them back for a second round to the respondent group. According to the method, this should go on for 2 or 3 or 4 rounds until a consensus is reached. Actually, I didn't get to that stage because I had to give my paper by the deadline. So this may be a limitation of my study, and I'll go and continue. Rights of enemies in medical care, women's work in medicine, and some participants suggested that prophetic medicine, we have an entity called prophetic medicine, should be taught as alternative medicine rather than within Islamic medical ethics. The participants gave valuable suggestions for more Islamic medical ethics topics, and these included quality of care, quality of life, telling the truth to the patient, mercy killing, relation with medical and drug industry, ethical issues, international health, ethical considerations in the genomic project, etiquette of communication with patients in Islam. And of course, it is very important and permitted in Islamic medical ethics to benefit from the wisdom and experience of non-Muslims. their opinion could be adopted if it doesn't conflict with the basic principles of Islam. Wisdom, according to Prophet Muhammad, is what the Muslim should strive to find from wherever source and follow. So, as to the quality of care, Islam urges highest competence and professionalism. Quran has said God loves those who perform to the best of their ability and beyond. And the Prophet also urges best performance. God loves that when any of you does any work, he or she does it to perfection. Teaching of evidence-based medicine was not included as a subject in my study because it is taught as a separate subject. Whatever is said about the motive for the evolution of evidence-based medicine, learning and practicing evidence-based medicine fulfills an ethical duty towards patients, institutions, and the country at large. Indeed, the origins of EBM concept could be traced in the writings of Razis, who wrote what has become physicians' consensus based on analogy and supported by research experiments should be your guide. And even the Quran requires evidence for any claim. There's one verse which says, say, produce an evidence for what you are claiming if what you say is true. Now, how should Islamic medical ethics be taught? I suggested 13 methods to the participants. There was consensus on 5, and there was disagreement on another 5. And I think the objection to bedside and internet teaching and learning is probably due to the fact that some of the participants think or thought that ethics shouldn't be discussed in front of the patient. In fact, not all bedside teaching takes place in front of patients. And indeed, for some ethical aspects, discussion with the patient becomes mandatory because patients need to know their rights. And however, this bedside teaching of ethics requires clinical and ethical skills. Another reason for objecting to relevant research, especially qualitative research. There is need for specialized journals or sections in journals on ethics. And finally, I personally would like two vital subjects to be added to the list of the subjects to be taught in Islamic medical ethics. These are human rights and equity in health. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Bella. I'll move directly then to my reading of Sherine Hamdy's paper. We'll hold questions until the end. This paper is entitled Bodies That Belong to God, Organ Transplants and Muslim Ethics in Egypt. Organ transplantation has been described as, quote, the most intensely social of all medical practices. It is a major subject of disagreement in Egypt, and efforts to initiate a national organ transplant program have consistently failed in the Egyptian parliament for more than 2 decades. The question as to whether Islam has any role in Egypt's reluctance to pass a law that would organize a national program is itself debated in normative as well as descriptive terms. That is to say, there's a genuine disagreement as to whether Islam should have any objection to what is essentially a medical issue, and whether Islam in fact does explain why there have been obstacles to establishing a national program. Many commentators, politicians, physicians, and journalists have maintained that Islam has nothing to do with resistance to organ transplantation, and they cite as their evidence the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran have both passed laws enabling national organ transplantation from both living and brain-dead donors. Resistance in Egypt, they argue, must be due to the uncontrolled black market in body parts and reports of organ theft that have tainted the public perception about organ transplantation. The current rector of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Mohammed Said Tantawi, seems to agree with this analysis, since he himself condoned organ transplantation and declared that it was, quote, a medical and not a religious question, unquote. In contrast, however, Sheikh Mohammed Mutwalli al-Sha'rawi, famous throughout Egypt for his widely popular television show that still airs on Fridays years after his death, had maintained that one cannot ethically donate organs that belong to God. Quote, how can you give a kidney that you yourself do not own, he had asked. This statement has resonated profoundly with many Egyptians, and that is to say, Sherine Hamdy's fieldwork among patients diagnosed as in need of kidney transplants, their family members, and their physicians, reveals a complex array of factors that help explain why this is the case. Through understanding the struggles that end-stage kidney failure patients endure from one day to the next, we can ask precisely what is meant by the body belonging to God. And how has this oft-cited theological statement come to stand in for an antagonistic attitude toward a particular medical intervention? An aggressive media campaign was launched against Sheikh Sha'rawi's statement that the body belongs to God. Some journalists claimed that he had deprived poor patients of treatment. Yet for the vast majority of Egyptians with whom I spoke, many of whom are on dialysis and diagnosed as in need of a kidney, and speaking with him over the course of several months, I learned that his previous experiences with medical treatment, his conviction that it is best to stay away from doctors in general, his unwillingness to expose his healthy son to what he considers unsafe and corrupt medical practice, his knowledge of a fellow patient who died during the operation, and the high financial cost such a procedure would bear on his family all strengthen his conviction. Here, Abdurrahim is not merely invoking the words he attributes to Sheikh Sha'rawi as a memorized formula because of the authority it bears. Rather, when Abdurrahim invokes this statement to explain his particular situation, he is also commenting on the statement and imparting new meanings to it. In fact, its very authority is constituted through Abdurrahim's process of interpretation and practice. Sha'rawi is positively perceived throughout Egypt as exerting tremendous efforts throughout his career at reawakening Muslims with a sense of awareness of God and piety. For example, in the mid-70s, when Egypt's top surgeons were first considering the prospect of initiating transplantation in Egypt, they met with and visited Sheikh Sha'rawi first to see if such a novel procedure was permissible. According to one vascular surgeon who recounted to me this conversation, Sha'rawi had said to them, "Are you afraid of death? Are you doing all this to prevent death? If we are God-fearing, what do we have to be afraid of? Death will go on. It must go on." Sheikh Ali Goma, the current Grand Mufti of Egypt, explains that such viewpoints represent a madhab, a particular way of seeing things. This should not be confused with a fatwa, a legal opinion or answer to a question. Nor should it be seen as a recommendation, let alone prescription, for someone's particular case. Sha'rawi's madhab does not answer the question about whether or not a particular person can receive a transplant in a particular way. Ali Guma argues that for the media to have taken up Sha'rawi's position and read it as a prohibition against anyone ever having a transplant is a misapplication and misunderstanding of how Islamic law works. Sheikh Ali Guma considers the case of a healthy mother donating a kidney to her sick child who will benefit from such an operation to pose an entirely different set of ethical questions than the case of a poor man trying to sell his kidney to alleviate himself from debts, or the case of a heart-beating, brain-dead donor who may be declared dead in order for his organs to be procured. Sheikh Ali Guma further insists that the irresponsible media and, quote, entertainment-style journalism of today contribute to distorting people's understandings of how Islamic ethics should be applied. As others have remarked to me, the media treats the muftis as if they are the Pope, and then derides them for not in actuality having such authority. For Sheikh Ali Guma, the fact that the same mufti might render permissible one person's decision to receive a transplant and render impermissible another's is, moreover, a feature of how Islamic legal ethics is supposed to work. In his terms, Islamic legal ethics, fiqh, is like a yo-yo. Something that is forbidden in one situation, like eating pork, is considered permitted and even obligatory in the case of starvation. Yet he concedes that because the general population has now lost an understanding of the mechanisms of Islamic law, the media has explained contradictory fatwas as evidence that the Islamic scholars have differed in opinion, and that they therefore do not know how to respond to this question. This has resulted in a blow to the scholars' credibility in the minds of many people. Sheikh Ali Guma's solution to the question of organ donation from consenting willing donors is to form a committee comprised of experts from many fields, including Islamic law, that reviews different cases. Furthermore, he insists that people need to be re-educated through the media, formal education, and the law about the mechanisms of Islamic legal ethics. But how does Sheikh Ali Guma's rather scholarly discussions about the appropriate application of Islamic law impact the lives of ordinary people who are faced with life and death situations? As is the case of the dialysis patient Abdurrahim, patients do not necessarily solicit formal fatwa for their particular cases. As I learned from reasoning and arguing with many patients on dialysis, they do not apply Sha'rawi's theological position as a legal prescription for their case. Almost all patients with whom I spoke were familiar with the idea that it is only God who owns bodies, and that this statement had been invoked in the context of the organ transplantation debate. Yet this statement was given meaning when put into practice. When parents donated kidneys to their offspring, this was considered a natural act of love. Patients spoke of the body belonging to God, and to donate body parts for the sake of their children posed no threat to this idea, as it is considered natural that parents should pass on their lives to their children, as one patient told me, like the branch of a tree. Older patients on dialysis, however, were reluctant to take kidneys from their adult children, and many patients also worried about taking organs from their adult siblings, especially those who are married. Considerations about the role in the family, cost of the operation, or etiology of the disease give meaning to how patients formed ethical decisions. For those who believe that their acute renal failure was due to living in a toxic environment, Sheikh Ali Gum'a and the dialysis patient Abdurrahim are using the term Islam to mean something much more all-encompassing than do more secular-minded audiences who view religion as a bounded social realm. This discrepancy should not be dismissed as the folly of religious practitioners who are unable to discern what is really religious from what is really political, economic, or medical. I suggest instead that we understand the categories of our informants on their own terms and use their classificatory tools of analysis as ways to critically interrogate our own. This may bring us toward a more accurate picture of what we are trying to describe. I conclude by suggesting that before we ask whether Islam is the reason why Egypt does not have a national organ transplant program, or what Islam's position is on organ transplantation, that we should reconsider our analytical categories and question, rather than assume, whether they can adequately capture the subjects of our analysis. To ask what is the Islamic position on organ transplantation presumes that both Muslim ethics and organ transplantation are separate, static entities that are easily knowable and the same everywhere else. A more productive approach is to view ethics and medical practice as dynamic processes that are contingent upon the exigencies of social laws.
If I may just make a correction, I made a terrible error of switching Tantawi and Sha'rawi in my talk. So for Egyptians worldwide and Muslims.
Whom did you mean? Tantawi or
Tantawi.
Tantawi.
Thank you very much to our panelists. We now have plenty of time for questions and answers. I please ask you to use the microphone so that all this is recorded. And if you would, please take the time to identify yourself briefly before asking your question.
Shahin Aksoy, Harran University, Faculty of Medicine, Turkey. I have a question to Professor Bella. First of all, I want to thank for his presentation. I will not talk about the methodology of your research, that I need to see the full paper of it, I think there are some concerns about this anyway. But you sought the answer to the question what and how to teach Islamic medical ethics or medical ethics. But I think assume that you will reach a perfect curriculum, and assume that you find out a perfect methodology to teach Islamic medical ethics. But the crucial question, which is more important, I think, who to teach medical ethics? If you cannot find the right person or right teachers to teach, your effort will be will be not fruitful anyway. So what do you suggest? Who do you suggest to teach? Which qualifications should have a person who may teach medical ethics?
Thank you very much. You have your reasons to have concern about my methodology. Actually, I used what is called the Delphi method. I don't know whether you are all here familiar with this method, the methodology, or not. As I said, it is unlike quantitative research. It is a controlled debate or consensus reaching sort of, and it doesn't require for the participants to be representative of a larger group, and therefore there is no need for statistics. You see, it is the opinions of a particular group of people, which could be different from opinion of another group. So, and I did not complete the full number of rounds in order to come out with a consensus, and this is what I said. Regarding your question on who to teach, actually, if you notice in my last slide on recommendations, that I recommended that it should be taught by all faculty. And I said each in his specialty. As you rightly said, it is extremely difficult for all the faculty currently to teach it unless they are trained. And this is why I recommended that all faculty should be trained to do it. Especially in bedside teaching, especially because you need to train doctors and students not only in the theoretical aspects of the thing, but also in the skills and attitudes. But currently, and what I do in my course in King Faisal University College of Medicine is really to invite people who are interested in the subject, whether they are medics or not, some religious leaders or scholars, if you like, and some doctors who are interested in or have some qualifications in religion besides medicine. So these are the people who are currently helping me to teach this course. But definitely you need really competence and knowledge in order to be able to teach this subject competently.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take a little list here, but Amy first, and then Sabine. I'm sorry, you've got it. Sorry, you're doing this, Nancy. You go ahead, please. No, I'll have Nancy do it then. Whoever has the microphone gets to talk.
Why do you think I took hold of the microphone? Professor Brokoff, I believe this is also a discussion, not just questions.
Correct.
So that, okay. My name is Farhat Moazzam, and I come from Pakistan. Pakistan has 160 million Muslims, none of who are Arab speaking, and very few of them speak in English. I've enjoyed the topics this morning. Just a couple of points, if I'm allowed to make them. When we talk of bioethics, we're talking of contemporary bioethics, and when Dr. Hamid speaks of the two cases that he had, in my experience in Pakistan, what is bioethics and how people perceive it, it depends on the intrinsic MD, the physician-patient relationship, which is very culture specific. Now, you make the point about autonomy. Autonomy, and you say in your paper, is a very specific thing. It's a historical and social construct of this part of the world. In Urdu, I can find no word for autonomy. So when I speak to my patients, the conversation is not that of autonomy. The patient looks at me and says, "You are like my ma," which is, "You're like my mother." And therefore, it changes entirely how you look at the relationship. So the issue of paternalism and autonomy, we have to understand that although Muslims are using those terms, we're the English-speaking elites who are using it. So just as a point there. The Dr. Bella's paper, I really enjoyed it. I think the most important thing is that you said more qualitative research is needed. You talk of a consensus in how to teach bioethics and what is to be taught. My question to you is there a consensus on what is Islamic medical ethics? Because we face the same thing that came through in principalism. We had the 4 principles, but they were principles. But when it comes down to really working it out, and Islam, I would say there is no such thing as an Islamic world. We have Muslims, and they live in very different, diverse worlds. So I think we need to find out in the qualitative research what our patients expect from us. Contemporary bioethics came around not because physicians or religious scholars sat down and said this is ethics. It came about because there was a public debate on it. And in Muslim countries, I have seen no such debate in which our patients and people, the average Muslim, is involved. And that's why Dr. Sherine Hamdy's paper really resonates with my experience in Pakistan. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you for your comment. It's very important comments you made. And I agree with you, and I would like to move it forward a little bit also. These 2 cases are cases in New York City, so it was in the cultural context of Islam in the West. And the reason I chose autonomy is for the very reasons that it is culture specific, and also that many writers have kind of incorporated autonomy and assumed, and like Bella put, how the Quran is consistent with these 4 principles of Beauchamp and Childers, which is contestable. It's very debatable. Hamada, Islamic Medical Association North America, said the 4 principles are consistent with Islam. And your point is very well taken. And I'm beginning to try to problematize the use of autonomy as kind of an Islamic principle or a principle that is universal. I think that's problematic, and I attempt to illustrate how it doesn't really work. It's not such a clean category in these 2 cases.
Hamza Skandarani from King Faisal University, Saudi Arabia. Thank you for enlightened talk. Definitely, I have enjoyed this so far. I just have a question for Professor Prokop. If you can answer it, if you couldn't, just take it as a comment, please, because you are sitting for Sherine. You said in the talk that Sheikh Sha'rawi, God bless his soul, passed an opinion with regards to organ transplant, and based on the fact that body belongs to God, by the same quotation, everything belongs to God, because simply Almighty is eternal. But taking from this, stemming from that simple thing, which is from the mesoderm, is the blood. How about blood transfusion? Because this is the water of life. And I was just wondering, would have his opinion on it by the same way as not to actually donate blood? I wouldn't speak for him, but I'm just thinking, because this is, again, it belongs to God. So what do you think? Is there any opinion on that?
Thank you for a terrific question. I'm hoping that Sherine Hamdy is actually listening in, and we'll get a high sign if she is able to bring a response back virtually and interrupt the questions at that point. But thank you for that important question. Dr. Bella?
Yeah, the question of autonomy, although there isn't a direct indication to this, but there is a categorical verse in the Quran which says there is no coercion in religion. Therefore, there is no coercion in anything. لا إكراه في الدين. There is no coercion in religion. and anything related to religion. And I believe this rule out any paternalistic attitude from amongst the doctors. Regarding your comment, Ma'am, I don't think anyone claims that there is a consensus on Islamic medical ethics, but we are trying to find out if there could be a consensus on Islamic medical ethics, or what we can call Islamic medical ethics. I refer to the point that one of the participants in my study preferred that we should not call the course Islamic medical ethics, we should just call it medical ethics. There was one point which I forgot now, but I may come
yes,
back
of course. Hassan from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Jonathan Kahn, an ethicist at University of Minnesota, often accuses ethicists of greasing the wheels to facilitate ends that we're already trying to achieve, and that I think comes up a couple times in your talks. To Dr. Bella, one of the criticisms I think of having used the Delphi method is that, yes, you're right, you attempt to achieve consensus, but generally within a cohort of people in whom consensus does not yet exist. And one of the concerns that I had as I was reading your paper was that even in the first two rounds, you had overwhelming consensus on a variety of topics, suggesting that maybe the deck was a little stacked. We talked about this briefly, but I wanted to maybe go into it a little bit more. More to the point, there were 3 instances where people did not agree, in particular, for example, in the teaching of prophetic medicine. And I found that particularly interesting. If you could comment on those people that disagreed and perhaps speculate on the people that were not selected for this process. And to you, Dr. Hamid, I was a little concerned about the use of Islam to justify the deportation of this particular individual. And again, just sort of I could arguably suggest that you could use Islam to go against that, and in an effort to protect his autonomy. What concerns did you have about that? So thanks to both of you.
Yeah. Start with prophetic medicine, which you would like to. Prophetic medicine. There is, as I said, there is a lot of writings on this. And the one, actually, it was one participant who suggested that it should not be taught as part of Islamic medical ethics, because he thought that prophetic medicine deals more with spiritual and it stresses preventive aspects rather than curative aspects. See, because prevention and prevention matter are anything on this it could be valid for any time, in any place, whereas prophetic medicine, which dealt with 13 cures, it may not be valid for all times and places. See, and Islam cared more for prevention rather than cure, because cure is changing, the medications and the prescriptions at the time of the Prophet will certainly not be valid for today, but certainly something like the quarantine principle, for example, or principles in environmental sanitation, or in personal cleanliness, or in dental hygiene or and health, are all valid for all times and places. You also mentioned something about the about consensus, isn't it, in the Delphi method?
Well, I would suggest that you maybe had too much consensus when you started your study already, when you did it. That perhaps you should have brought in some people who do not agree, and then see where the consensus lies.
Well, I did say in the full text of my paper that the people were not homogeneous, and they were not either heterogeneous, but it just happened. It's the people I knew who had interest in this area. It is the people whom I identified through my literature search, and they were people who were suggested, the names of which were suggested by their own institutions. And as I said, we were speaking about 23 people, and their opinion at the end of the day could be different from another panel of the same number, in a different place.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Shinawani, for your question. That's precisely the reason I used that example, because it is problematic that the Islam was invoked to essentially go against the patient's will and deport the patient from the country, and the risks and benefits of deportation was discussed extensively, and among American psychiatrists themselves, Islam out of the picture, it was also problematic. I mean, this is a person who chose to come to the United States. With the current political climate, the likelihood of him coming back was highly unlikely. How would his family receive him? What would it be construed as a failure? Would he be able to find treatment in Egypt? So it was problematic, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate, is how Islam can be used to coerce a patient and how it can be problematic. So as we develop curricula or consistent statements, how are we going to use that? Are we going to use that to say, when a patient says, according to my understanding of Islam, as our doctor's going to say, no, but this fatwa and this position statement goes against what you say, therefore you do not have the right to refuse treatment in this case. Interestingly, and this can happen obviously here, not only in the clinical setting but also in the court system. Earlier this year, there was a case in which, if I have time to go over, in which a demented Jewish woman, her daughter had surrogate decision-making capacity in New York legally, and she wanted to withdraw nutritional care support of her mother. The patient's sisters contested this and said the patient is an Orthodox Jew and does not believe in withdrawing nutrition. But the daughter had surrogate decision-making capacity and was legally had the right to withdraw nutrition. So it happened that it was a holiday, and they brought it up to a judge, and they didn't have to go through the kind of the more formal court process. But the judge ruled against the patient's daughter, even though she had surrogate decision-making, and quoted the halakha, the Jewish law, saying that since this patient is Orthodox Jew, and she would have wanted to draw from Jewish law, we're going to overrule the surrogate decision-making maker's judgment. So my point here is, if we have a list of Muslim, this is what Islam says, on various issues, how is it going to be used on the patients? It can have profound impact on the decision making and what's implemented.
Thank you very much.
Iqbal Jaffer, Queensland, Australia, by way of Canada. I want to refer to Dr. Hamid's paper first and then Dr. Bella's paper. On the second last page, you write, with the development of Islamic bioethics, the physicians will likely secure a more paternalistic position, as they will position themselves as both authoritative in medicine as well as the Islamic tradition, unless the physician presents the patient with the choices of bioethical positions to choose from. That seems a little bit overarching, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the case with someone who has knowledge of Christian or Jewish bioethics, for which there is much more literature than there is Islamic bioethics. So I wonder how maybe you can make a statement like that. And in Dr. Bella's paper, I just want to clarify, when you say Islamic bioethics, are you talking about an additional component of teaching bioethics to medical students or residents from an Islamic perspective to supplement something that already exists? Or are you talking about teaching bioethics completely from an Islamic perspective because they are an Islamic country? And the second point is, you write, it also depends on the medical teachers as role models. Many of these teachers are indeed bad examples in their practice. And I just want to know, is this a function of where you are, or maybe it's just something that you see as a kind of overall picture of the system itself?
I'm not sure why it would be overarching. because I mean clearly physicians across religions, and the literature I cited specifically dealt with Christian physicians as well as non-practicing physicians who used religion and undermined the patient's religious values to coerce them to comply to treatment. So I think it's commonly done. As Dr. Muazzam said, especially in Eastern cultures where the relationship is more paternalistic to begin with, I think when you bring in religion and kind of position yourself as a religious authority or refer to religious authorities, I think that you're in danger of really overwhelming the patient with the authority.
What I mean is that it doesn't have to be the way.
Absolutely.
In fact, it can actually be a positive thing that doctors can be more aware of these sorts of things and say that, listen, this is what I understand. What do you think? Rather than, this is what I understand, this is what we're going to do.
Absolutely, I agree with you. It doesn't have to be that way. And I try to suggest in my talk that one way of avoiding that is to present to the patient the multiple positions on a single issue. But the first step to that is for us as healthcare providers to have insight to how we tend to impose our ethical positions on patients. So, I mean, there's two issues here. One is for our own insight of how we kind of impose our own positions, and two, to be a little bit literate or familiar with the multiple positions on a single ethical issue.
Dr. Bella?
Yeah, okay. On what I meant by Islamic medical ethics is that teaching of medical ethics in general in our part of the world, when teaching medical ethics, emphasis should be put on the Islamic standpoint on issues related to these. And actually, as I said, it's a knowledge of good or bad, what's allowed and what's not allowed, and this is mandatory even from an Islamic point of view. So it is Islamic ethics in general. If you looked at the list of topics which I gave in this handout, you would find topics like principles of current medical ethics compared to Islamic medical ethics, and so on. So we do teach PU CHAMPS for principles of Western medical ethics and all these things, but we put the emphasis on regarding teachers setting the bad example. Does this apply to? Yeah, I believe this applies to many places in the world. There are. I'm not saying that this is a rule, but I'm not even either saying it is an exception. But in many places, I qualified in Sudan for my MD. I had my postgraduate training in the UK. I went around in World Health Organization missions and assignments, and had the opportunity to stay for considerable times in different parts of the world, in the Middle East, Far East. And I did meet with examples of very bad examples of people. Shall I tell a story? A little story was very briefly. Yeah, when I was doing my postgraduate in a very reputable, one of the most important hospitals, children's hospital in the world. See, and I used to work with a consultant. Of course, I will hold the name, huh? And he is very reluctant to. He is leaving all the clinic for me. It's a referral clinic, you know. And the first day I worked with him, he said, Dr. Bella, send me the NLMs only. Send me the NLMs only. And I was asking one of my colleagues, a British colleague, he said, who are these? He said, you didn't listen to him carefully. He said, send me only the NLMs, the nice looking mothers only. You see. And I thought that was the first incident with bad ethics. We were dealing with children, and he wants me to send him only the NLMs, which are nice-looking mothers, and that was the first incident. And there were so many incidents that I encountered in many parts and in different parts of the world. So I believe it is a universal problem. Even teachers of medicine setting very, very bad examples as ethical sort of examples, yeah.
Dr. Brockart, if you could keep your comment very short, we'll take this as our last question before.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's a nice-looking question, but in any case, I have a question for Professor Bella. I'm Bert Broekhorst from the University of Leuven in Belgium. I'm the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Religious Studies there. It's a question about, well, you were talking about the teaching of Islamic medical ethics, and doing so, you seem to be concentrating on the role of Islamic medical ethics in the Muslim countries, however diverse these already might be. But what about the role of Islamic medical ethics in the curricula in the US and in Europe? What would your views be on this topic? Thank you.
I did refer in my paper to the possibility of Islamic medical ethics benefiting from secular ethics and vice versa. You see, now the fact that we are meeting in this place to discuss something on Islam or Islamic medical ethics is a sheer indication that the world is becoming really a small place, and that people are becoming more and more interested in each other. So I do believe that with more exposure, with more understanding, with more meetings, and we can learn from each other. Why not? Why not? I mean, if you go and learn in details about what Islam stands, or this Islamic standpoint, or fatwa, or religious ruling on certain things, you realize that these are very, very progressive compared to many, existing fatwas or rulings on these things. And people in Mecca now speak of, fatwas in which you can say the doctor can prolong the life of the patient. Such a statement could have been very unacceptable decades back, because you will be told neither doctor nor anyone else can prolong a life of an individual. We are destined to die at certain place. But this fatwa, which is a very progressive fatwa, comes from Mecca actually, and that which was a detailed thing. I can give you the full text of it. It is really very interesting. So there are so many progressive things in Islamic medical ethics that people elsewhere can benefit from.
Thank you very much. We'll put the questions off. The ideas and topics we've raised so far will be continually discussed for the next few days, I'm certain. I want to thank our presenters once again, and we'll convene at 10:30 here. There is a break next door.